everyone to our teaching chat. We have a number of teaching chats this month to really make sure that any of the questions and concerns and issues that we want to discuss prior to the spring semester are addressed. So thank many of you for coming yesterday and having the conversation that we had about empathetic course design. Obviously, we can continue some of that conversation if we'd like. We also have Trina McCarty, an instructional designer from Global Campus, here to talk about how some of our ideas may manifest in things like Canvas and things like that. Very, very tech savvy kind of people can help us innovate. We also have Andy Thompson, the director of the Office of Student Life, here to talk about how it is that we can kind of deal with our students and tracking our students and being there for our students in the age of COVID. One of the things that I know in my classes in the fall, and Noah is nodding because he saw these too, is we got lots and lots and lots of letters from the Office of Student Life that said, hey, your student is either in quarantine or is in isolation. And then the student never reached out and didn't really know how we were supposed to do that as instructors. So Andy is here to share some of his thoughts on those kind of things and any other issues related to being there for our students in that way. So at this point, I would like to kind of open the floor. This is kind of like an office hours type thing. For those of you who haven't been to our teaching class before, we don't have an agenda, but we're here to talk and to share ideas and to crowdsource these things. So who would like to kind of start out with a question? We'll monitor the chat, but as always, you're completely welcome to unmute yourself, unmute your video, unmute your voice, wherever you are, however you're comfortable, to contribute in that way. So this is how it feels when we ask those students our questions over Zoom. So I'm going to chime in for the first one, and we have Andy here, and I'm curious. So Andy, what should I be doing when I get those letters from your office telling me I have students in quarantine and in isolation?
Mute here. Yeah, I mean, I think, Don, that's a really good question, and I think it's the kind of cop-out answer is it really depends on the class you're teaching and the structure of the class that you have. So I think it's what's unique to this COVID situation is, typically let's rewind to pre-COVID. You're going to get a letter from us because the student has come to us and said, hey, XYZ is going on and I need some support. And so then we're having a conversation with them, or our student staff's having a conversation with them about, here's the process. We're going to send a letter to your faculty, but you need to reach out to your faculty to discuss that. In this COVID environment, I'll tell you, I got 17 faxes this morning from Lafine for students that are in isolation or in quarantine. That's kind of automatically happening now. So there's not necessarily that clear connection with us and the student. And so I think, Don, that explains but then we never heard from the student. Because as we know, students aren't great about their emails all the time. And so the letter says this, and we follow up with an email to the student to say, hey, let us know what we can do, but communicate with your faculty. Well, if a student goes to Lafine and it's just kind of auto happening, they're copied on all these emails. They very well may not be reading them. They may not be recognizing they need to be contacting you. And so I think that's an additional hurdle we've seen. And so we're going to talk in our office about what else can we add in our communication to help with that? Because I'm just going to be honest, we don't have time to call every student that's in quarantine or isolation. I would love to, I want to be able to do that. We don't have the people power to do that, to make those connections. So what I would love to see happen in my ideal world, we talk about the provost has given us guidance of be empathetic and have grace for your student. And those are awesome words, but it's hard. How do you tangibly make that associate in your class? And so I think part of what, the professors I've seen be really successful is how is just the structure of the class done in a way that allows for knowing that you're going to have 10 to 2 week chunks, 10 days to 2 week chunks where students are out. And there's these constantly overlapping. You have, once it hits a class or hits a group, it really can fire in there quite a bit. You also get the fun of, we may send you a quarantine letter that the student was a close contact. And then all of a sudden, 3 days later, you're seeing that you're getting an isolation letter because now the student's positive. And a quarantining student and their ability to participate to us is, that's still a healthy student, right? They're just quarantining. So their ability to participate academically should still be high functioning, right? Whereas now all of a sudden, if they're sick, and I know our college students are hit a little less, but the exhaustion and some of those things that hit, like it can still be very real for our students. So I think for me, if you get in my ideal world, and I know this that this may not translate well for some of you into what you can do, I would really, I know students really are appreciative when a faculty member gets that letter and shoots an email that says, hey, got this letter, let me know what we can do to kind of help with this. Or if your class is just already structured in a way that maybe in your syllabus or at the beginning of the year, you say, hey, if you get one of these letters, here's how I want you to communicate with me. So it's being told up front, and you can establish that consistent communication. Again, if you're teaching a class online of 100 students versus a class of 15, how you do that, I recognize is very different. And you also have management you have to go through. I know there's some people on the call here that I peppered personally with letters. And so I know it's hard. So I don't know, that's kind of my general overview thought. And I'm happy to answer questions or get some feedback on our process as well, because we want to try to do this in a way that's helpful to you all as we manage this, like what I assume is going to be another rush here as we come back in the spring. Like I think we're going to see a big batch of isolations and quarantines again.
Just want to say thank you to Office of Student Life. I can't even imagine what you guys have been bombarded with, because I have not helped, because I know I have sent my students to you guys frequently for documentation. But I really appreciate what you guys did.
I appreciate that. And I actually, when I said I know there's people on this call that I've just destroyed with letters, you were one of the people I was referencing. So.
So Andy, what are the kind of obstacles that you're seeing our students have, and how we can help them through them right now through your office?
You know, I think one of the biggest things, and it ties directly into COVID, but it's not even for our students that have had COVID or are quarantined with COVID. I mean, the amount of isolation we're seeing from our students, you know, as we're doing this socially distanced environment, and then once they get into quarantine and isolation, they're just feeling alone. And I think those online classes that don't necessarily have a component like this, like we're hearing from students a lot that they're just lonely and they don't know how to connect to folks. And we know when we're feeling isolated in that sense, then we start to see an increased, you know, anxiety and depression and mental health in general. And so I think that's, as a campus community, that's something that's really concerning, that we as faculty, and that's really where in my ideal world, if faculty get a letter, could then follow up also to the students, because the biggest thing we hear from students is, it was so nice to hear from somebody proactively during my sickness. And so we, you know, when we get in isolation, we send that initial email to a student, but when they hear it from other people that try to get those connections and those care points, I think that helps considerably in terms of a student just feeling like they've got someone to lean on. And so that isolation piece is my number one thing I'm concerned about right now. And as well as in that burnout piece, you know, we all felt it in the fall without a break, or, you know, we've had the 13 weeks or whatever, and then we hit Thanksgiving and we went into winter break. You know, this spring, there's no break. We're starting on the 25th, and we got 16 weeks. We got one day in April, right? And I think we've got some great, in our office, we're highly concerned about that. The burnout factor that's going to occur for our students, and not for me, not just our students, but our faculty and staff. Because then if you're burnt as a faculty and staff, how good are you at, I struggle with my empathy being very high by week 12 for my students, because I'm also fried, right? And so how do we as a campus community truly support ourselves without just talking about it, but making some actual changes? And so I know in you know, the provost message, there's encouraging faculty to give some mental health days, to give some space and grace. I really hope faculty actually grab a hold of that, because I think our campus community is going to need that. I'm more concerned about it in the spring than I was in the fall, just because of the length of the time that we're going to do that without a meaningful break.
And Andy, I absolutely appreciate that. We talked about some of those issues yesterday. We had a presentation on infusing empathy into your courses. So you're providing a lot of solidification for some of the stuff that we talked about. I'll reiterate a point I made yesterday that a mental health day doesn't mean just canceling the class. It means also removing the work that would have been done in that class, because just canceling the class section doesn't actually provide the relief the student will need. And I will also reiterate that the provost is recommending that our discretion, we do add in a second day at least over the course of the semester to provide relief to our students. So thank you for that point. Kaylee has had her hand up for a little bit, so I want to make sure she has the opportunity to ask her question or make her comment.
I didn't know how to take the hand down, Dawn. So I have two things on that. I have a statement on that and then a question for you, Dawn, from yesterday. So Andy, when you were talking about that, one thing that it made me think of that really resonated, helped, we saw amazing connections with our students, is we held a Web Wednesday, just an open time that students could get on and talk to us, ask questions, etc. And at first we were like, you know, they might not attend. Like, how do you make sure we kind of make those connections? So we said, okay, there's, 12 Web Wednesdays on the calendar when we count out, or 15, whatever it was. You need to check in 5 times with us. And if that, because we had 116 students in our class. And so if that meant, if we said, if you just want to get on and say, hey, here's my check-in, see you later, that's fine. That's up to you. And that we noticed consistently the same students that really needed that time, they would get on there and they would just sit on there the whole time too with us and just listen. And lots of them were students that were at home with their parents because they weren't on campus anymore. And they were in Western Kansas and they just wanted to be around people their age and just talk and listen. And it really, by the end, it pulled at your heartstrings. We made a lot of great connections with students. I know my students from last semester better than I've ever known them before because of that time. So then each week also I would have a lunch bunch time where I just kind of fluctuated it during the week when it sort of fit in my schedule so that maybe I could hit some different students at different times that would work for them if they just wanted to get on and have lunch with me. And some weeks I'd have kids get on and some weeks I wouldn't, and that was okay. And then I also did a morning coffee chat time once a week that I'd put on there. And I would have the same kids get on that too, that just needed to connect and talk, so.
That's awesome.
Kaylee, can I interject there one second? So one of the things that Kaylee's talking about, at least what I'm hearing her talking about, is we want to welcome our students and be there for our students. I meant to make a plug at the beginning of this session and I didn't, and I'm remembering now. Global Campus is putting out 3-minute Thursday tips. And what they're doing, if you saw K-State today, they have little videos to kind of help us do things. What they have today is how to set up a course welcome. So how to let our students know that we're going to be there for them throughout the class. So we're going to plug these on our social media. We're going to promote these on our social media, but the really cool tips. And I thought it was related to what you were saying, Kaylee. So I didn't mean to kind of.
No, that's great. Anytime. I think anytime we can all share and get ideas that might fit for our own teaching style, because, not everything resonates with everybody. So then that brings me my second question then for you, Dawn. So I feel like I have a lot of empathy. I put a lot of empathy in my course. I mean, you know that, I know you. On the syllabus, when you put that, do you put the wordage empathy statement?
Yes, I do.
You do? Okay.
I
was working on my syllabus last night and I wondered how you worded that. Okay.
I absolutely do. Now it's important to understand, like I teach psychology courses. Empathy is a construct we study and we try to understand. So it's a point for me to actually introduce constructs that we're going to be dealing with that semester. So if empathy statement is going to be a term you don't want to get into or something like that, you can put humanity statement or whatever it is that's going to work for you. But I do call it an empathy statement because empathy is a term I want my students to be aware of.
Me too. So good. Thank you.
Sure. And I think I saw Scott's hand up a little bit ago, and I don't see it up now, but Scott, do you have a question or a comment?
I'll jump in real quick. I was typing it out maybe instead, but I just want to say that since before COVID and since the beginning of online learning management systems with our students, virtual office hours or virtual open time to chat with the instructor is one of the most persistent pieces of feedback we've gotten through the entire 14 years of K-State delivering online courses through a organized learning management system. So I would say, just to reinforce the point, that that's a darn good idea that has a good track record, and we still hear from students today about that.
So I'll also point out that in response to some of your comments, Kaylee, that Melissa's is talking about, that she has an open assignment on Canvas each week where students can kind of use their voices to connect with the instructor in some way. So sort of like what you have for those check-in Wednesdays, I think you said, she kind of does it through her Canvas course and puts it on their to-do list each week. So kind of a good way to kind of build that into the course structure. So I really like that.
So I love that idea. I call mine a professional development discussion board. And so I put out there and say, anything you want to put on there? Do you have questions about, what we're studying, anything, down to where would be a good place to go get a great cup of coffee? Just to try to get them to have dialogue with each other and not just with me too. So, yeah.
And Melissa's clarifying that was a copied and stolen idea, as we talked about yesterday. This is where we get all of our ideas, from each other. And this is why the teaching chats are so great, in my opinion. Eva has a great question about how do we incorporate mental health days when the entire class is online and there's an amount of work that gets done over work rather than per day. I have one class that will meet via Zoom for an hour on each Friday, but the rest of the work is on their own with periodic check-ins. So let's hear some ideas about this. So, and Andy, I don't know if your hand is in reference to this or to a different question. All right, so we'll hold on to Andy's hand for just 1 second. So in answers to this, how do we build the mental health breaks, those refreshing points, those regeneratizing points, into a class that's almost completely online or is completely online?
I was thinking about that because I'm teaching an online class this semester. And so it was already an 8-week class, but I was also struggling with what to do with my empathetic late policy, where I still had people turning stuff in late, even though I said, hey, just reach out to me and basically just give me an excuse, any excuse, it doesn't matter. So my thinking was, what I could do is, because I have a bunch of low stakes assignments, is go ahead and let them drop some of those, so that if something happens, if they need a break, if they need a week off, like they'll still be responsible for the content and covering it, but maybe they don't take the quiz, that they don't get to the quiz that week or to the activity. So maybe just allowing them to drop some of the lower stakes assignments.
So they get all the content, but not all of the work is one way we can kind of reduce the workload. Okay, I like that. Kaylee likes that too. I see a thumbs up going there. What are other ideas for how we can do this? Because this is challenging. And I've talked to a lot of colleagues who have said, everything in my class is important. I can't drop anything. And they'll say, we have accreditation or whatever it is. And they'll say, there's absolutely nothing that can be taken out of my course. It was actually one of the big things that resulted in us not having a spring break of any point, not even a 2-day spring break or even a fall break in subsequent years, is people saying there's nothing that can be dropped from my course. So I like the idea of dropping a little bit of work potentially, even if you're not dropping content. What are other ideas to get around this?
I think that I've mentioned this in this group before, but for all the classes that I am teaching or overseeing, in week 8, where I've selected a film that's related to the course topics, so that week 8 is just all fully asynchronous, and their assignment is to watch a movie at the film at some point during that week. And then at the end of the week, they turn in they have a guide to fill out as they watch the film, and then they write a short reflection, and they'll turn that in at the end of the week. And so it's something that gives them kind of that reprieve, some space from attending class, doing kind of like all the same stuff. They're still getting content, and it's able to, I teach language classes, so I'm teaching Spanish. So they're getting that content, they're learning about culture. And then when we come back to class, all together on Monday in week 9, we can talk about the themes, talk about the culture, the things that surprised them, the way that language was used. But it kind of, it's a way to have students still thinking about what's going on in your course and give them a break.
I like in the chat too, we're seeing that people are talking about letting students choose when their mental health day is, or when they want to kind of use that mulligan or whatever that is, because you might not know or be able to anticipate when life is really happening to that student. Andy may know because he may hear about it in his office, but the rest of us may not know. So letting that student kind of decide, this is the week, I'm not going to take the quiz, this is the week, I'm not going to do the assignment, is kind of an interesting idea. And I like that. One of the things that as we're talking, I'm wondering about, someone has said like dropping grades. As a type A individual myself, I did all the work. I never let a 0 be my dropped grade, because there's always a possibility my next performance would be better than my, poorest performance to date or something like that. So I'm wondering about saying students can't do all the work. So rather than saying, you do 11, but we'll only count 10, say we'll offer 11, but you can only submit 10. I'm wondering then if it kind of keeps them from actually doing one, because as a student, I would not have failed to do one. I would have done them all, and then let the math work out in my favor. And as Melissa said, there's potentially less grading going on there too. So I'm wondering if something like that, as a student, I might have seen that as restrictive, saying I can't, what do you mean I can't do all the work? But I'm wondering if we explain that and let them know the context, if that's something that might work out well with our students. And that was a real question. If anyone has any comments or feedback to provide, I'm brainstorming here.
Dawn, this is Melissa. I think I might have felt the same way as a student. What do you mean I can't do it?
Right.
I think a lot of students would feel relieved to know that, but I don't know that I have an answer to your question, but I like the question itself, because I would feel that way as a student. Oh, I'm just going to skip this. What if I misunderstand it and then I won't know I got it wrong, kind of a thing. So that restriction I think is worth considering.
Noah, write that down. We might try that out this semester in advanced social.
It is an interesting thing, because as we watch how faculty work, sometimes it's we automatically drop the lowest test score. If you miss a test, no big deal. We'll just average it with your next, the series of the other ones. And how many students we get in that say, but I already did bad on one test. I don't want this 0 to be it, because I was planning on dropping the one that I got a 40% on. And we try to have good conversations with students about that kind of looks ungrateful a little bit. Like you have faculty that are trying to build this in, to don't do all of them, or we're going to drop this low one. And so it is a little bit of damned if you do, damned if you don't as a faculty member. I think a little bit sometimes when you're trying to auto build into your syllabus some space for a student to have those mental health concerns or just life kind of things come up. So I appreciate this conversation and brainstorm.
And I will say from experience, and I think a lot of you would empathize with this, is no matter what you do, someone is not going to like that you did that. No matter what your intentions were, no matter how kind, humane, or empathetic it was, someone is either not going to see your intentions that way or is going to resist what you tried to do. And I think we've just got to do the best we can for the most, and we'll go from there.
I want to, from a supporting students perspective, I really liked what Kathleen had put in the chat about the available until dates, even though there's still some penalty there, because I know for some students, it's, and a lot of the conversation we have is we can't ask a faculty member to, you missed it, you're 3 weeks off or you're whatever, to give you 100% credit on this. But sometimes that 50% credit is enough to still keep that student afloat and give some credit. We hear all the time, and I'm sure you all do too, is, well, if I do this for you, it's not fair to the rest of the class. Whereas doing that available until, so there's still some penalty, but it gives the student some space and grace. I really personally just really love that idea and that structure, and can sell that to our students really easily. Of you still have a go at it. There's a penalty here, but you still have a go. It's not a 0 and done kind of thing. So I just wanted to give props to that particular structure.
So there's a conversation going in the chat, and Andy, I haven't forgotten that you have a question, but just want to follow this thread. There's a conversation kind of in the chat about when students would decide what it is they would want to do versus miss. One of the things that I've done, because I used to have where students write 2 out of 3 papers, but I would let them know what all 3 papers were. And what I would hope is they would kind of pick the 2 papers that best fit their interests and their abilities and things like that. What happened in practice is almost all of my students wrote the 2nd and 3rd paper. Because when the first paper came around, they said, well, I don't have to do this one. I'd rather do all these other things that are taking my short-term attention. And then only a couple of people would do that first one. So I thought I was spacing out my grading. In actuality, I didn't. The second and third paper were the ones that most of the students did. I'm wondering, though, if it's a smaller stakes sort of thing rather than kind of a longer-ish paper, if it might have a little bit more utility in a class that I would teach.
I actually do choose 2 out of 3. And I really, really try to emphasize with students that there's no point in doing all 3. Like, don't even bother. You're not going to get extra credit. And they still ask, and that's fine, because I would be that student too who would think I know what I was doing and then make a mistake. Weirdly enough, though, I have the opposite. I get most of my submissions the first and second. But I push it really hard too. I push the first 2 really hard to try to get them done. And then, and it's worked out really well. They said that they like to have the options of picking 2 out of it. With the way Canvas is, it doesn't make their life easy, and I don't know why it has to be so hard, but to drop an assignment without terrifying your students, I don't know why that has to be so hard. But if with a lot of communication, you can kind of get through it.
I'm wondering if you take those assignments like at the beginning of the semester, if you kind of list out what the topics are for these types of assignments and ask students at the beginning, like which of these topics most interests you, pick, 2 of 3 or 3 of 4, or however many you're doing, so that they can choose at the beginning of the semester and then, maybe hold them to it a little bit more. Like, these are the ones that you are interested in, based on what you want to get out of this course. I recommend that you do these assignments and then skip this one that you're not as excited about.
That could be an interesting idea. I wonder about the record keeping on that in some of my classes, and whether there'd be like a switch penalty or something like that. But I do like that idea, and what we're doing is sharing ideas, and that's awesome. And at any point, if people have to leave, people are saying, goodbye in the chat if they have to go do things at 12:30. Absolutely, teaching chats are here for you when and how you want to use them. So thank you so much for being here at all. Andy, you had your hand up a while back. I don't know if we'd gotten the opportunity for you to share that topic or comment.
Well, that's going back to kind of the beginning of the conversation when Andy was talking about, all these letters that we get in. I oversee about 200 students a semester. And so it can be a lot getting all those emails of all the students that need to quarantine and isolate. And I found it really helpful, probably not like this isn't like anything amazing, but just having a letter, like, showing empathy for yourself, having a form letter that you can send out to those students that you can, so it seems personalized, but it's, very much just like copy paste, here you go. That also, being empathetic towards your students, asks and makes sure that students who are quarantining or isolating, that they have food, that they have what they need, so that you're just showing that you want to make sure that they're okay. And if they don't have that stuff, that you can connect them to resources, so that their immediate needs are being taken care of, in addition to whatever classroom stuff is going on.
I really love that. I mean, because I touched on that at the beginning. So that the more we're doing those touch points, the better. And I want to reiterate too, if you ever have a student that writes back and says, yeah, I'm not getting these needs met, just kick us a message, because if they're living in, and we actually had students that were in housing isolation saying they weren't getting fed, and like housing literally brings them 3 meals a day. So it's like, what's missing? Like, how are we not connecting that? Or our off-campus students are a little different. So just know that you can always connect back to us. And one of us is on call 24/7, 365. So even if it's off hours and it's an emergency, you can call our office number and they can get you in touch with us. I was just running some data really quickly, and I was curious when we were talking about COVID letters. We sent over 4,400 COVID isolation quarantine letters last semester. So if we all felt like we got a lot, because there was a lot. So I just thought that for context, non-COVID letters, we only sent about 300 non-COVID letters. So those kind of general concerns, pregnancy, mono, funeral sort of letters. So COVID kind of took all of our lives a little bit there in terms of letter sending and receiving. So appreciate everything you all did to manage that.
So I want to point out a comment in the chat that Kevin Wanklin had made, and this was in reference to kind of the students missing assignments. And he says that he offers alternative assignments that they can do at any point, kind of like a wildcard thing. They do at any point to kind of make up for a missed assignment or something like that. And I really like that idea. I sort of think of it almost as an extra credit assignment. And when I think about extra credit, I think about something that's going to be useful for the student educationally and not a lot of work for me. So if I can kind of find a way to do that and you let the students do it when they want to, and they can maybe spend, I don't know if there's a maximum on how many they can spend, but I like that as an idea. That's a cool way to let students kind of take some autonomy and some independence and some empowerment of their own education. So I really like that idea, Kevin.
One of the things that I've found really useful for extra credit is I've taken all these great surveys that I got from AQ and other things that I've read, and I turn them into their extra credit surveys. So every other week they get questions about, like, what do you think about the textbook? Do you think are you going to use it? The exam wrappers and the exam study prep and all of, like I said, all those great surveys that I have adapted from the AQ materials and other stuff. That's where I use that. And then I have my TA go and read what the student, it's all auto graded. So she goes and reads what the student says and sort of collects all the common themes. And so then I can actually act on some of that feedback that students getting. So they're doing their extra credit. They're doing some metacognition. And then I'm getting kind of a idea of how they're thinking about the course.
One of the things that I do, I actually do that and I embed it in the points of the course. So rather than have it be extra credit, is something I expect them to do. They get points for doing it. And I think every course needs to have some effort points, kind of in there. You're putting in the time, you're doing something of value, you get some points to contribute to that. And that's because as a data scientist, I like a full data set. And if I do something for extra credit, I get my most highly motivated students are typically the ones that do that. But if I make it part of the points, typically almost all my students do it. So I get a fuller data set that enriches me a little bit more. So I would invite some of you to kind of think about that as being the weekly reflection. You heard me talk about this a little bit yesterday. In those weekly reflections, we can do things like this. Ask how the textbook is. Before exams, I ask things like, how much did you study for this? What were the barriers to your studying? How well do you think you're going to do? Those kinds of things. How much did you engage? How engaged was I? And those kind of things. So we can give them actually points embedded in the course to kind of let them know that we expect you to be studying and we're going to ask you about it when we get to that exam. But then I get a fuller data set and kind of evaluating how I'm doing and how they're doing.
I'm just curious, are you getting anonymous comments then, but then knowing who submitted them? Or is it?
That is a great question. At that point, I typically don't get qualitative comments too much. We typically have quantitative data. And I've found the students are pretty upfront. I let them know that, if you said you didn't study, that doesn't impact our grading at all. But students have never, and I've been doing this for years, have never indicated any resistance to let me know how they're doing. And it's interesting because they do get variability. They're not just saying, hey, you were great this week. They'll be like, hey, this wasn't your best week, kind of thing in terms of the numerical ratings. And I think them circling numbers kind of removes any of, or less of the hesitancy they might have to kind of let me know how they're doing. But no, it's not data that could be held against them. I don't think, and no student has kind of led that to me, but I do recognize that that is a potential issue. Someone mentioned in the comment, extra credit. My mother used to say the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. Nothing better applies to extra credit. Yeah, extra credit relies on initiative and motivation and interest. And those are the same things that kind of drive students to do well in the class. One of the things that I'd noticed this past semester is that a lot of my students who weren't performing well weren't aware of the extra credit opportunities. We put them out there in Canvas, we put them out there in announcements, we sent emails to the students multiple times. And it's the students who most needed that missed it. And I don't know another way to get that information to them. We tried to use all the ways to get the information to them. But I do think that was a rich gets richer, poor gets poor kind of situation. Although I hope that the rich includes many more of my students than just the upper top, given how we made that as well known as we could. But I absolutely recognize the issues that go on with that. And if we build it into the actual course structure, not as extra credit, maybe we can avoid some of that too.
That brought to mind something that McCharney used to do in his large class. Before class started, he would create a slide or some music as they're coming in, and those slides would give announcements, something fun. If a student club had something going on, that would be a way he would give them a little bit of floor time without it interfering with his class content. But sometimes he'd have jokes up there, cartoons up there, just anything to sort of get their mind active. And the students really loved it, because I also advised a student group, and I always knew that I could have my students go in this history class and do that. But they loved it a lot. And that might be a way that you can remind them of those extra credit things. Is just have a commercial at the beginning of class, so to speak.
We actually had weekly highlight sessions. I mentioned this yesterday, and we would make them available for asynchronous viewing. And the highlight sessions became kind of like a me telling you the study guide as well as making announcements. A number of students came synchronously. Not many people watched them asynchronously, which I think was a little bit hard for us. And I think it's the same kind of thing. The people who didn't have time to come to it were the same ones who didn't have time to watch it later, which was, a little bit of an issue for us. But I do like the idea of, in a predictable way, letting our students know this is how you're going to get information. So it's going to be the beginning of a class. It's going to be that email you send out on Monday morning, whatever that's going to be. I think letting your students know how to find the information in your class is important.
We talked about before the panic we had starting our asynchronous class the last 3 weeks. We're just about done. Tomorrow their projects are due. And most of them that I spoke with said they really liked the 20-minute video that I would upload. But I only wanted to do it if I could talk to a small audience on Zoom. It's like I didn't want to talk into a blank screen to pass that information on, because there's that interaction and the facial expressions that you get from the students on the screen that help you know whether you're getting through to them and what else you might need to say to those that aren't getting that information synchronously. So we're going to do a Qualtrics and see how we did with the quick turnaround on our course, and give them some time to do it this weekend. So we'll see what kind of feedback we get.
I love that. I'll be interested to hear how that goes. I still don't know if we got into Andy's initial question. Andy, have we got to the thing you raised your hand about?
Yeah, Andy.
Yeah, no, it was just a comment about empathy and having that letter ready for your students when they're quarantining or isolating.
Sure. I was going to bring up something else that's kind of a way that in our college, we don't really have quizzes. We have some exams because these folks are drawing all the time. But when we do have, when I try to have a quiz, I make it a game. That's the thing I love to do. So I'll tell them they're going to have a quiz and they need to study. And they're thinking, oh, traditional quiz, I really got to cram, whatever. And I'll bring in 2 buzzers and we'll do Family Feud. I'll just make it a Family Feud. I'll make them have teams and they compete against each other in teams. And then there's a gift. So they have some motivation. They can monitor and talk to each other and say, okay, who knows the answer? Kind of like College Bowl or whatever. But they have fun with that and they realize, oh, she's not going to create something that's going to make us feel like, oh, we got to have the answer. But it's a learning experience at the same time, and it's fun for them to do. And that also is a down day for us, because then we're not necessarily drawing, we're just having a party and in the studio. So I found that works very well, and I just bought some easy buttons and let them go at it.
I love that. I think the extent to which we can make our learning fun, engaging, and valuable for our students, the better they're going to do it. And I mentioned yesterday, don't ever give an assignment that you don't want to grade. And it sounds like the stuff that you're having your students to do would be fun for you too.
I have an experience with that last semester. I had a discussion board assignment that was happening weekly that 2 or 3 weeks into, I realized I didn't like the way I was phrasing my question. I was hating reading the same responses over and over and over again, and completely retooled it to kind of like what you were talking about, Don. It's like, what was the most interesting thing you found, in this week's? And it just made it a lot. I looked forward to grading it more than I did before.
So Kevin has a topic switch, and this is something I'm really interested to hear people's thoughts on, is hybrid classes. I found, as Kevin did last semester, that my students tended to prefer to Zoom in rather than to come face-to-face in my hybrid and my high flex classes. So given that everybody's starting online for 2 weeks, are they going to come back? And how can we get them to come back if we think it's important that they come back if they're able? And what do we do after those first 2 weeks? So how has people's high flex and hybrid attendance been when students are given the choice so far? And then what are our thoughts for those 2 weeks after our online start?
So I have a thought on this. This definitely happened as the semester progressed in my class in the fall. I had most of my students there in person, and they were all first-year students. And what I would do for the spring, which would take some back work, is to compare attendance, if you have records of them, of who was in person and who was in Zoom, and their class performance, and give your spring students the data and say, here's what happened with the students who attended, period, and either way, because there's always a correlation between attendance and performance. And then compare and contrast for them, here's the in-person students versus the Zoom students and how well they did. I mean, obviously anonymously, but show them the data and the numbers and tell them, here's what happened last semester when students started coming over Zoom, and here's how they performed. And at least in my class, I would be able to say, it's a pretty direct correlation between those who attended in person and did well, those who attended irregularly and didn't do well or Zoomed instead. And then you've got data to back up what you're seeing. And I think that will reach a lot of students, not all of them, but I think it could help.
One of the things that I struggle with is that I want my students to come to class face-to-face. When they come on Zoom, I want their videos on. But for lots of reasons, I don't mandate that. So while I think it's the best thing for them, it's definitely the best thing for me. Given the situations they're facing and the things that they're juggling, I wonder if I risk marginalizing my students who can't make the decision I'd like them to make if I come on really strong.
I don't know. I actually had 2 sections last semester. I created a second section so there would be an option for a group to come every day. And of course they did choose to do that and they were better, but it was, the final grades was like 7% difference on average for the ones that even, and I did not always Zoom that second section. If they missed, they could, look at the recording of the first section, but is a little bit confounded because they chose at the start to change.
Right. One of the things that I struggle with too is that I will admit I am better online or in person than I am high flex. I cannot provide the same experience to people at home and in the classroom that I could provide if they were all one or the other. And I know that, and I struggle with that. So I really, at one point in one of my classes last year, it was a class, there were only 13 students in the class, but 11 of them were at home and 2 of them came to class. And every week I kind of told the learning assistant, like, this is the last time we meet in person. And every week when we're going to do this, one of the students say, I'm so glad that you still have the in-person option because you're the only class that has that for me. So we say, all right, well, we'll keep doing it like this. And I really struggle because, I mentioned the empathy for ourselves yesterday too. The best decision for me is not necessarily the best decision for all of my students, nor is it necessarily the decision my university wants me to make. And I struggle with all of those factors kind of impinging on what I get to do as a teacher.
At the beginning of last semester, I sent out a survey to all my classes. I was teaching 5 sections and asking, what was your preference? Would your preference be to be in person, to be synchronously via Zoom, or to watch recordings? And vast majority, 3/4 of them wanted in person. And so I did high flex where they could come in person or they could watch on Zoom, and I recorded all the lectures. So if anyone couldn't make it, they could watch it afterwards. And for the first 2 weeks, it was about that 60, 75%. And then it dropped down to like 10% showed up in person the rest of the semester. I feel lucky that at least with the topics I teach, I feel like I can still teach everything regardless of whether they're in person or in Zoom. And so I think I was able to manage it. But feedback I did get from students is they liked the synchronous nature of the class, feeling like it fit into their schedule. They knew they had to show up. You know, I took attendance regardless of whether they were away or in Zoom, and it worked. But I recognize that not all subjects can deliver the content the same way. But the HiFlex worked for my students.
Clarissa notes in the chat that says you can ask your students in a. Oh, I'm sorry, Clarissa, you actually.
No, that's
ahead,
okay.
please.
I was going to say I did what Brandon did last semester, and I'm going to send out a survey. And one thing I was going to change, just because we are going to be online for 2 weeks, is I had made videos for my students to watch, but many of them didn't, and even said in their evaluation, it was hard for me to make my own time, even though they only came 1 day a week instead of both days a week for my class. They just couldn't make time to watch them. So I figured, since we're going to be online, what I'm going to do this semester is I'm just going to lecture in class and make the videos. And if they miss it, they can watch the video like Brayden was saying. And that actually reduces the amount of work I have to do, because those videos take forever to make. But just using the class time for that lecture will be helpful. My students can then ask questions in real time, but they still have the video later to watch it. So that saves me some work, but also because we're going to be online for 2 weeks, they're all going to be in class all those days anyway. I don't need to do the 1 day a week sort of thing, at least to begin with. So
we had a situation because we run anywhere from 9 to 11 studios at the same time for our freshmen. And we sent out a survey and asked them before they came to K-State how they wanted their course content delivered. And we actually had 2 full sections that were strictly online. And I taught one of them. I wasn't sure how well that was going to work. I'd never done that for freshmen who need skill development that they can see very well, as opposed to on a computer. But what I did is I offered at night sessions as well. So they'd come to class, they were synchronous, but then I would say, if anybody wants to come back and show me where they are in their progress, they could. And a lot of my students did. And my best students were the ones that did. It was very, very apparent. The ones that didn't get that extra information. Maybe they didn't show up in class, but they didn't even choose to come back in the afternoons or evenings. And I let the students choose, like what day, what time, when are you mostly going to be available? We use GroupMe to do that so that everybody knew. So there was no excuse for those who didn't know because they didn't check their GroupMe, even if they didn't check their email. But I found that most of my freshmen were on board. They had a lot of fun because they got the best of me in the evening. I'd be funny, silly, would really relax, and they would relax, but they got a lot of time from me. And not everybody can do that. If you have children, husband, I don't at home. So I had nothing else to do but just spend some fun time with my students. And because we have small numbers, we have anywhere from 15 to 18 students in these studios, you really get to know them. You spend a lot of time with them, and that makes a difference, where they will tell you things that they might not tell their other faculty is one thing that I found. But because my students were in the rooms, a lot of them were on campus, I would say, go around to the other classes and see what they're doing. And we're going to have a moment when you come back and tell me what you saw. What did you learn from the other teachers in the building? Because we might teach slightly different. So I called it walkabout. And then we also had heart to heart, which was something Don was talking about, where we just not have class that day. And the first question was always, how are you doing in your other classes? Let's talk about your other classes. Are they hindering, helping you? How do you feel about your physics? How do you feel about your speech class? How far are you along in that? And then at the end, when I think they're pretty comfortable telling me honesty and truth, I'd say, well, okay, what do you think of my class? And be honest. I mean, you know, I didn't want them feeling like I was asking that question first and they were a little uptight. So I found that they enjoyed that. We joke about it. It didn't feel tough for me to hear their suggestions, because I also said to them, I don't want to wait till TVALs. I want to know right now so that I can make adjustments that help you do better in the class. And it put that onus on them. And that seemed to work very well for getting good comments and good feedback.
That is excellent. And I think the nature of your class being kind of so investing and so intimate around the stuff that you do, I think makes that a really nice place for that to happen. Andy has been very, very patient with her hand up for a long time now. So Andy, please.
Well, this is slightly related to this high flex idea that I also, really struggled with that last semester. And as the semester went on, it started with almost everybody coming in person and ended with one student in person and everybody else online. And so, that's a challenge, but I also find a lot of people are talking about recording their classes and putting them up. And I feel really conflicted about this, particularly since my classes, I really push for interaction. And I don't think, especially with language classes, to learn a language, you really have to be speaking it and interacting with people. And so I don't want that, oh, well, I can just watch it later on Canvas to be well, I don't need to go to class because I can just watch it later. So I don't know. I also am curious about student perceptions and how much they're going to interact when they see that little red dot saying that they're being recorded, if that's going to inhibit them actually participating to the extent that they would were it not being recorded. So I'm curious as to how many people are recording their classes and making them available, and I don't know, kind of what the pros and cons are of that.
I do record my classes and make them available, but I also tell my classes that there will be a point that I'll turn the recording off so that if you want to ask a question that is not a part of the archive of the class, you can wait until then. And students will do that. They will wait till the end and usually it's the question like, hey, this happened in my life. Can you tell me about that? But there's always kind of an unrecorded portion of my class to allow for that, especially if a student wants that. I also typically, if it's a synchronous kind of Zoom class, there's a point where I'll say, all right, we're going to stick around for a couple minutes and be available for questions. Kind of like those moments at the end of class when people would wait for you to finish. We kind of create those in Zoom too. But I absolutely recognize exactly what you're saying, Andy, is that, and Andy just moved on my screen. I don't know, oh, she's down there now. It's weird. I'll be talking to the little square and the little square moves. So Andy, I think it's kind of letting our students know we're going to provide that opportunity for you to be recorded, be part of the archive. If you have a great question, other people probably have the same question. You're probably helping them. But if you know it on eProb, you're going to have space for that too. But I think recording it and not telling your students then posting it is not a good idea.
Yeah, that's the thing I learned this semester with our course is recording it. And I would speak as if I'm talking to all of them. I'd say good morning and glad to have you here, even if they're not on the screen. And then I would use my chat and students would send me something privately, which would give me a way to respond to them off recording if we needed to, or I would respond to them privately as a way to take out those things that you didn't want recorded. And then some of them would email me later. That would be another way that they could. Sometimes it showed up on my GroupMe while we were in the session. So there's lots of different ways I think that you can create some privacy for students and allow that time for them to interact with you individually.
So I just discovered that the reason that Andy changed her position on my screen is because when people raise their hands, they move to the upper left. I've just now discovered this on Zoom. I don't know how long I've been on Zoom and now just discovered this, but that means that Brandon has a question and then Kevin has a question or a comment. Brandon and then Kevin.
I was just going to answer Andy's question regarding attendance and how I was able to try to create an incentive to not procrastinate and just watch the recording. So I have an attendance component in my class. It's done through an exit ticket at the end of class. And if students want to get credit for that day, but want to do so by not being there and watch the recording, they have to email me ahead of time. So there's kind of this incentive that, yeah, they can, but they got to let me know. And if they want that credit, they have to be proactive. And that helps kind of pull people in. And it's kind of a low risk thing. If they happen to tell me afterwards, hey, I couldn't make it, can I just watch the recording? I'll let them, but they've got to go through me. And that seems to be enough an incentive to try to get them to come to class and not just blow it off and watch the recordings.
Excellent. Thank you for offering that. Kevin.
Yeah, I found that the last 2 weeks when I tried to give flexibility and, went ahead and recorded them and posted them. So then I have attendance exercise somewhere in the middle of lecture. So I embedded one of those in the last lecture. And out of 70 students, only 15 of them watched it. Enough to catch that there was an embedded question in there.
And I'll say that I would rather err on the side of preparing materials that I want my students to have that they didn't use than to not prepare the materials that they should have had. But I also realize that when I provide something to 200 students on YouTube and they get 13 views, it's a little crushing thinking about the time and effort I put into that. But I'm also thinking there are 13 students who got that experience, and I was glad that they had it. And now is the point where I realize that there are two Kevins. So second Kevin.
Yeah, I'll be the second Kevin. So I had, before this whole COVID thing happened, I recorded all my lectures. And what I noticed when I recorded my lectures but didn't have any attendance in my class participation or my class people just dropped off like crazy. And then they got really behind because, their future self was always going to watch it, always going to do that. But future self and actual self didn't actually interact very well. So I started putting in, attendance-based things into my class. And then what I would notice is I would have a few people watch my lecture, but around exam times, that number would just shoot up. Like I have 200 people in my class. I maybe have 13, 14 people watch the lecture the day it was due. But before the exam or before a homework was due, man, that number dropped up. I had like 100 and so odd views. And they kept saying, please, please, please keep recording the lectures, but also require me to come to class because I know I won't come to class as well. So I think there has to be both things in there to get people to come. But they love that YouTube, hey, I want to figure out how to do this. Let me just go back and watch what Wakeland was doing there for 15 minutes and that will solve some problems.
So at this point, I love those ideas, Kevin. I love that your students have the self-awareness to say, please require me to do it because I'm not going to do it on my own. And I think that's wonderful empowerment. So they're giving you the power over them so that they'll make the better decisions. I love that. We are about out of time today. I'll remind you all that we have another teaching chat next Wednesday at noon, same Zoom channel. So same bat time, same bat channel, except on Wednesday. We'll do this again. And if, in the meantime, if anyone have questions or anything, please shoot us emails or those kinds of things. We're going to be putting out some more resources coming up here a little bit. And I'll again plug the Global Campus resources, the 3-minute Tuesday tips. They did one today on course welcomes, and that is available on K-State Today. We'll also put it out over the TLC Facebook and Twitter later this afternoon if we have not already. So at this point, if anyone wants to stick around for a second, I'll stick around for a little bit. But otherwise, thank you again so much for contributing to our conversation. I've taken a lot of notes on stuff that I'm planning to try from the ideas that I've heard today. And I'm looking forward to our teaching chat again next week. In 2 weeks, LB is going to present on mind, body, and spirit. And we then have an amazing schedule for you for the rest of the spring. So thank you so much for taking some time today. And again, I'll stick around for a minute or two, but if you got to go at 1, it was so great to see you. Thank you.